CURES is sponsored by Wheeler Health's Better Choice program. More at wheelerhealth.org.
Helping you lead a healthier life. This is CURES.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CURES Show, where we explore the cutting edge of wellness. I'm Kara Sundlin, and it's Free Therapy Day. It's when we check in with our friend, Dr. Laura Saunders, for a mental health boost. And she comes from the Institute of Living, a premier organization right in the great city of Hartford, but attracts people from all over. So, Dr. Saunders, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Kara.
So we're going to focus on the children and how we can help them build more resilient brains, specifically in the summer, which I know most moms, if you're like me and you're working or you're busy or whatever you're doing, it's difficult because the kids are now home and we are supposed to be somehow the entertainment, the chef, and the mini psychologist of what's best for them this summer.
Right. And that's why I like to look at these as guidelines, not this is what you have to do every day, right? Because that's just more pressure, and none of us need more pressure in our lives.
Right.
So we're looking at some general guidelines of ways to, based on research and a lot of clinical practice on what we can do to improve the quality of our children's social, emotional, and intellectual well-being.
Yeah, and before we even get into what we can do this summer, because I know you've got some great ideas, and I think they're really doable and really actionable, which I love. But let's just talk about the kids. We often fall victim to thinking, just do this, or why didn't you remember that? Why did I have to tell you 5 times? You actually say we need to understand that they're not just mini adults. Their brains actually are really different than ours.
Yes. I mean, this has taken us, honestly, hundreds of years to figure out. But children's brains are different. They, I can make a mistake maybe 1 or 2 times and I'm like, I really shouldn't do that anymore, right? But I'm an adult and I have a lot of learning experience to fall back on. Children are constantly encountering new experiences. So their learning curve is very different. They're not just mini adults. They learn at their own pace and their own rate. And we want to try to do things while their brain is still kind of pliable and has some plasticity, give them experiences that shape them or move them in a positive direction.
Yeah, I mean, I remember you telling me, like, check in again in 3 months, and I'm thinking that's not very long, with something I was asking about my son, and you're like, 3 months is a really long time for a 12 or 13-year-old. So this summer, I mean, our kids could be totally different and maybe have new awareness, new skills. I mean, we could look at this as an opportunity to help them grow this summer. But you want us to be a gardener, not a carpenter.
Right. So I love this metaphor. And because it's so, we could also fit in sculptor, right? Be a gardener, not a sculptor, or not a carpenter. So the metaphor, what it really means is that, a carpenter, a sculptor is creating an exact form, those individuals that they want their child to be a doctor or a lawyer or a nurse or whatever. They want their child to be something very specific, and they kind of push and put a lot of pressure on to move their child in that direction. So that's, again, a lot of pressure. What we want to do as parents is be gardeners. We want to create a fertile soil and some sunshine, and which I would, fertile soil is a stable home environment. Some sunshine is love, attention, and caring, and, experiences that help you grow and nurture. And by experiences, I don't mean that things have to be perfect, right? What do they say about trees? Why are trees in New England so big and tall and sturdy? It's because we have storms, right? We have storms that test and cause, tree trunks and branches to bend and curve, and that stress actually helps them grow to be stronger. So in this fertile environment that I want parents to create as gardeners, it's not that things have to be perfect. Again, the concept is what's called good enough. You just need to be a good enough parent, but we want to provide the soil and the environment to allow growth and for children to kind of be who they're going to be.
Yeah, and that's very different than you got to do this on this day, and you've got to do this on that day, and you better be working on your SATs, and you better be working on this. Like, there's so much pressure to try, and I think as parents, we can feel like we're missing the ball when we look down the street and say, oh my gosh, they're doing all these camps, they've got this, they've got that, they're, you know, my kid's going to be behind. You really discourage us from kind of jumping on that bandwagon.
Right, and that comparison is never, it's not good for the parent, it's definitely not good for the child. And you know, this metaphor also falls under those kids like at, you know, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, 13 years old, who are already specializing in a sport.
Right.
Right, they're doing soccer, 12 months a year, they're doing lacrosse, they're doing, you know, field hockey, whatever it is that they're doing it all the time. And actually what some professional athletes have said pretty unequivocally, as well as coaches, is that it's actually multi-sport training, right? You do field hockey in the fall, and then you do basketball in the winter, and then you try softball in the spring. Whatever it is, that you try different things, it gives you different experiences, and then helps your body as well as your mind grow in different ways. So we want to provide opportunities and experiences. As the gardener, we want that fertile, rich soil to allow our children to grow in whatever direction they're meant to grow in, not just what I want them to grow in.
Right. And that doesn't necessarily mean overly permissive. Oh, they want to grow in that direction. They want to go hang out with those kids and do whatever they want. That's not what you're saying. But you're saying that we need structure and probably some safety rules, but we don't want rigidity.
Right. Because what happens, Kara, with a flower start growing outside the garden area or outside the bed where they're planted, they get mowed down, right? So if we're going to continue this metaphor, we want growth to happen, but there needs to be some confines, some boundaries, some structure, some guidelines about where that growth happens. Just because you want your child to grow doesn't mean you're going to send them out to live in the woods on their own for a few days, right? So we want growth, but we want it to be within certainly reasonable boundaries, taking into consideration safety issues and other things.
So when you say reasonable structure or, you know, without rigidity, it can be really tough because especially we're looking like, oh my gosh, they want to sleep in, then they're just going to lay on the TV, then they're going to do this, and like you're going to work. So how can we approach this in a middle of the road way to give some structure and some responsibility and still have it be a nice summer?
It's a hard balance to strike, but I think we can do it. And I do know that what happens typically, you know, some schools are just letting out, you know, at the end of last week, you know, those students are just like, oh, I don't want any responsibilities. I don't want to have to do anything for a long time. I just need a break. And I'm okay with a little break, right? Parents need breaks, kids need breaks, but a break is not until the end of July, right? That's not a break. So a break is, you know, you take the rest of the week off, you have a long weekend, you have a little break. From there, what we want to do is provide some structure. And the way that I look at this is not like school, which is from 9 to 10, you do this, from 10 to 11, you do this, 11 to 12, you do that. That's what school's for. And you know what? That's effective for young people to learn. But what we want is to have some amount of structure or activities. And that, again, doesn't mean that you're doing summer camp from 9 to 12, you have a short break, and then from 1 to 4, you're in a different camp, and the parents are just carting them all over the place. I understand that sometimes parents who work, like myself and like you know, we need our kids to have some activities because either they're too young or we don't want them sitting home all day long. But that's where you have what I call anchor events. So they might be in a camp from 9 to 12, and your child's 13, and you're okay with your child being home alone. Or you tend to get out of work early in the summers. So you have an anchor event for the afternoon. I need you to walk the dog. I need you to take the garbage out. I need you to, you can, do a play date with a friend, right? You have another anchor event. So it's something that works you up. So, your anchor event's at 3 o'clock. So I'd like you to do X before your 3 o'clock activity. So it's providing some structure, but not the same amount of structure as school.
Yeah. And then what about screen time? Should we have some rules? And do you have some advice depending on age?
I think a little downtime and a little screen-free time is good for everyone. So, it could be like 2 to 2:30 or 2 to 3 or 3 to 4, whatever time you set is screen-free time. You get a book. I don't care if you read a magazine. I don't care if you draw or color or walk around the block. You need to do something that's screen-free. I'd love some physical activity in the lives of kids who tend to be more sedentary and isolative. But you need to have some downtime, some screen-free time, because that's what allows your imagination to soar.
Yeah, and so we've talked about this before. I think we all grew up being bored a lot, and that led to building forts or doing whatever, and the boredom actually is a good thing. We not only need to tolerate that, but it can lead to creativity, and it can lead to problem solving.
So it's really the way that creativity blooms or blossoms in your mind. It's when you have that downtime. Going for a walk, even if you're listening to music when you're going on a walk, allows you time with all the visual stimulation, all the things going on around you. It allows you time for thoughts or ideas to come into your head. That certainly happens as adults. I mean, I know that happens to me, but we need to start to give our children some emotional time and space for creativity to be more abundant.
Yeah, and then we want to talk and read to your child a lot. This is a time where, you might get to see your kids a little bit more because their schedules aren't as busy, and you can maybe make some after work time or some routines, or maybe people are taking off early on Fridays. You really recommend just reading a book or even talking to your kids a lot because it builds their brain.
It builds their brain. It also builds your connection to them, right? And parents, in generally this day and age, want to feel that they have some influence or some connection with their children. This is especially true for young children, right? You want to be able to read to them and read a lot to them, because that reading also then creates discussion, right? Oh, we just read this page about, a giant beanstalk. Do you know that I'm growing green beans in my garden, right? I mean, it leads to conversation. It leads to something. Even for kids that have difficulty with reading, there's ways to, like, you read a page and I read a page, or you read these 2 pages, I read these 2 pages. So you can alternate. We're not, trying to force or cram down reading so that people hate reading. But it's as much about the connection as it is about the reading itself.
Yeah, and what about teens? I mean, some schools do summer reading, others don't. I almost wish they all did, because you have that back and forth. But even if your kids are a little older, a little bit more like, I'm going to do what I want, should we be enforcing some reading?
Well, again, reading can be a magazine.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be like the great American novel.
But it shouldn't
Reading
be TikTok.
you could look at a magazine. You could do, well, I guess magazines. Well, I still look at magazines.
Yeah.
But there are ways to kind of shut your mind down a little bit. It's just not being on screens and social media and inundating your mind with electronics.
Yeah.
Honestly, even in this day and age, watching a TV show without an electronic device next to you is less stimulation than it is being on screens and scrolling.
Right.
So, I wouldn't have said that 10, 15 years ago. I would have said, TV is much screen time as anything else, but it's a very, very different kind of screen time than being on, your devices, your smartphones and whatnot, your iPads and other things.
And this is a time to get to know your kids and maybe know their feelings. I mean, we know that so many kids are struggling with anxiety, with other mental health issues. So this is a time we could really connect. It's also a time where it could get, if you're not policing it, I guess it could get worse, because so much of the research, the Anxious Generation book, others are saying that the more screen time, the more hours on a device, the higher the level of anxiety.
Right. We talked last week about social media in teens, and I think it was an American Psychiatric Association survey, or American Psychological Association. It really looked at, anything greater than 3 hours a day on social media doubles the rate of depression. I mean, these are serious statistics. So just having some downtime, some screen-free time, whether you're choosing to read, whether you're drawing or coloring, any activity that is that is creative or is more kind of like screen-free, allows your brain to rest, and it's just a different kind of learning and input.
And speaking of mental health concerns, I want to take just a real quick break here to hear a word from one of our sponsors that is trying to help folks with a mental health issue, and that would be gambling. Take a listen.
Struggling with gambling? Wheeler Health's Better Choice program offers personalized support and treatment to help you regain control. Visit WheelerHealth.org to learn more and take the first step towards recovery today.
All right, so we're back now, and one of the ways that we can help our kids this summer, we're talking about being gardeners, not carpenters. We want fertile soil. We don't want rigidity of what they're going to be. But I'm back here with Dr. Laura Saunders, and a simple thing like going to grandma's house or meeting the aunts and uncles at the barbecue, that actually is something really good because you want our children exposed to different types of people who have different viewpoints.
Carbon copies of ourselves. I mean, at least I hope that's not what we want. We don't want them to be carbon copies of ourselves. We want them to be their own individual, thinking, breathing, creative people. So that means exposing them to different things. You know, people of different religions, different backgrounds, different racial identities, different gender identities, people that are different than us. You know, there are some communities, even here in Hartford, where communities are very kind of secular or walled off. You know, it's considered a more upper class or in fact lower class, whatever it is. But we really want to expose people to lots of different kinds of expose our young people to different people of all different things, because it just gives them as much diversity and lets them see that there's things that are different and not always the same.
Yeah, different people means different ideas and opinions, and we've talked about it before, that having that level of tolerance, having that level of grit, all of that leads to success. The only staying in your own little pool, those kids don't tend to fare as well as adults.
Right, because they become very kind of fixed and rigid, and actually the single most important trait to have in order to have any kind of mental health or emotional well-being is actually emotional flexibility or cognitive flexibility. It's the ability to adjust. So, you know, hearing about people who have different life circumstances or come from different backgrounds gives you a sense of perspective and helps kind of flex you a little bit and realize that, wow, you know, it doesn't have to just be this way to be successful. People can live this kind of life and be successful, or have these kind of experiences and be successful. So exposing your young people to people of different shapes, sizes, and opportunities.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, I have a daughter who will be going off to college soon. I know you have a daughter who's college age, and I was just reading an article in Forbes magazine that they're actually, some of the hirings of the biggest companies we know are less likely right now to pick some kids from Ivy League schools. And they said the reason is they like them from the high-level state schools, that they consider them the new Ivies, is what they called it, because they said they need people who can work in a diverse environment and can hit the ground running. And they thought maybe the kids coming from the Ivy Leagues weren't as prepared. So it's just interesting that that idea of having more experiences, more diversity, more tolerance is actually being looked for in the job market.
Right, because it's the diversity of experiences and opportunities that builds your, as you said, grit and resilience. You know, I think there's some assumptions, not all of them are true, that if you're coming from some of the Ivy Leagues, you come from a more privileged or wealthy background. That's not 100% the case, but it is. I mean, there's still a lot of legacies in those schools, so it is the case, and oftentimes. But you know, having other life experiences, being from other either universities or, you know, and I love the fact that, you know, someone lives in Connecticut, but they want to go to school in another state or another area. It just gives you difference in your experiences and expands your worldview.
Yeah. And in fact, that was one of my daughter's only qualifications. She said, I just don't want to go to school where I'm from. I want to try something new. So that's, hey, and if they do want to go to school where they're from, you can still find variants in other places. And that's where it leads us to your fifth point, support independence. So we want to support their independence, not necessarily let them fall through to something horrible, but like we want to be there more as scaffolds.
Right. So it starts young, right? It starts young not doing everything for your children, what we've talked about, like what the lawnmower parent, right, who mows down the lawn so their path is smooth. We don't want to do that. We want them, they have to learn some independence. That means thinking for yourself. The reality is, by upper elementary school, kids need to problem solve and think on their feet. Experiences will happen, or someone will say something or do something to them, and they need to be able to either speak up for themselves or solve the problem or let an adult know. I mean, so it's not that far off that kids need to have some problem solving and conflict resolution skills. So the more we give them opportunities to, and again, back in our day, you used to ride your bikes, God only knows where, and manage your experiences. You got called in at the end of the day to come home for dinner, and then you went out again for a while after dinner until it got dark. Those experiences are really growth producing. Now, I'm not saying don't have any accountability for your kids days at a time, but giving them that independence. It doesn't have to be that kids stay within the four walls of their home or the white picket fence of the yard or the community. Having those experiences, I think, is absolutely invaluable.
I think so many parents are afraid. We did have a lot more freedom. I just remember at a very young age roller skating or taking my bike and coming home when I was supposed to, but there was no one tracking me. I mean, I can tell you where my kids are right now on Life 360. And I think that a lot of parents, have that. So we feel like, oh, the world is so much more dangerous now. I don't know if we're wrong, but from a psychological perspective, how can we balance that feeling like we have to keep everybody safe, but knowing that we really got to let our kids have some freedom or they're not going to grow up the way that we want them to?
Well, I often say knowledge is power. This is in this area, sometimes having so much information, and actually sometimes it means like turning off the news, because you hear about, this accident happened and that shooting happened, and that, the world's, the Middle East is at war. I mean, all these things sometimes weigh on our sense of well-being, and that things are going to be okay. And that's where you just have to focus right on the here and now. So my child wants to go out and play in the yard. I don't have to be sitting and staring at them the whole time. I don't necessarily think a big bad wolf is going to come and get them, because if I'm carrying that level of anxiety all the time, I am very likely projecting that anxiety onto my child, and they're not going to want to go and play outside because they think the big bad wolf will come. A little bit of tongue in cheek there, but we have to give our kids a little bit of freedom. Yes, it was actually fine to, I lived across the street from a park growing up, to just go and play in the park and be out there for hours at a time. Did I sometimes make some bad decisions? Yeah, I did sometimes make some bad decisions. Thankfully, I made less bad decisions than my brothers did. But, that's how I learned, like, that didn't work out good for me. I don't want to do that again.
Yeah.
So some of those experiences are learning. Now, I'm not saying, again, sending your kids out with weapons and if you live in an unsafe area, that is something else to consider. But giving your child opportunities to solve problems, think on their own, and take care of themselves a little bit.
Yeah, and our final 5 minutes, I just want to go back and the points that we want to take home with us. You want to be a parent who's a gardener, not a carpenter. That means we're having fertile soil, but we're not telling them exactly how they have to be. You want structure, but not rigidity. We hope to be reading a lot, exposing them to different types of people, and supporting independence. Now, what are we going to do with the conflict? Because I feel like parents and kids are around each other more often. And maybe with the little ones, those stages, they just want to cuddle with you and they just want to go to bed. That's cute. But they get a little older and we're like, yay, family time, and let's do all this. And there's conflict because maybe your teens are not used to you being around so much, and they're used to more independence, or you're expecting them to be with you more now. There can be conflict. How do we set up this summer so it's not arguing?
So here's the reality. The more successful you are as a parent, the more your child is kind of an independent thinking being. But that feels like a loss, right? So it's reminding yourself as the parent, what's my goal here? Is my goal that my child, does every single thing I want them to do every day? I mean, I might want them to do a couple of the things. So, you have some expectations, but not zero expectations. But if you didn't do all 10 things that were on your list for the day, it doesn't mean the day was a failure.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes in these situations, it's parents modifying their expectations, not having zero expectations and not having super high expectations, but modifying their expectations, reminding yourself, what's the goal? What's the goal in this situation? What's the goal, for my child's day? My goal is that they had a little bit of reading time and that they put their laundry away, right? Those are reasonable goals.
Okay.
Or that they interacted with a friend. I'm big into social goals. So it's having, more reasonable, moderate goals and not looking to have things done your way all the time.
Yeah.
Because that just creates a lot of head banging and conflict.
Yeah. So, for instance, if you're at that age where you're expecting the kids have all day to get something done, then like asking them to do their laundry, even if they don't normally do it when they're at school and kids, that could be something good to do. But we're not going to get too upset if they forgot and never brought it out of the dryer and didn't fold it. We're just going to say, okay, that was step one, but like, please make sure that's done before you do the next level. Like, they're not going to necessarily do it the way we want them to all the time. Or you're going to come home and you expected the kitchen to be clean and their version of clean is a little different than yours. But okay, you tried. Here's my expectation for the next time.
Right. I mean, I'm not saying like give up.
Right.
So that's a great example. Like, you needed your child to do X. So the other thing is, a lot of the kids that take the garbage out, right? The garbage needs to go out on Thursday night because the garbage is picked up on Friday morning. Well, it would make sense to put the garbage out a little earlier in the afternoon, not at midnight, but the goal is that the garbage needs to be out for it to be picked up on Friday morning. So if you need to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and put the garbage out, and again, a little bit of this is tongue in cheek, but you have to set the goal, let them sort of work it out, and they realize, well, it's a real bummer because you made me get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and put the garbage out on a Friday morning because I didn't put it out on Thursday night. So maybe next time I'll put it out a little earlier, or maybe next time I'll put my laundry away a little earlier because you wouldn't let me have ice cream after dinner because none of my laundry was put away.
Right.
So there can be some natural consequences, but it's really looking for where's the learning here and what's the goal.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. We want to. It's not so much punishments. I guess modern psychology has taught us that it's not about the punishments and the nagging. It's more about positive reinforcement or linking a desired behavior, to a natural consequence. So I guess we only have a minute left, but that's something to consider, that we can do a little behavior modeling, a little shaping this summer, but it's more about incentive. Like, I want you to get to the point where you clean your room every day. So guess what? You're not allowed to go out and ride your bike around or whatever until you've made your bed. Like something like that.
Right, but what's perfect about that is, what does clean your room mean? Clean your room means dusting? No. To me, what's important is you make your bed and your laundry's off the floor. So that's very clear communication. Your bed is made and your laundry's off the floor. So that's what I expect, right? And then you can go out and play and do other things. So it's having expectations, but making them clear and communicating them directly.
Okay. So obviously you are at the Institute of Living. And in our last 15 seconds, I'll just say thank you, Dr. Saunders. We've got our marching orders. I hope everyone has a nice summer.
Me too. Take care, Kara.
Thanks, Dr. Saunders. You can follow me at Kara Sundlin for more information on the cutting edge of wellness.
CURES is sponsored by Wheeler Health's Better Choice program. More at wheelerhealth.org.